Well, a very good afternoon to everybody here. It's delightful to see a packed hall, and as everybody has said, it really is a tribute to NK's charm, especially so many students whom we hope to hear many questions from in the course of the next 60 minutes. As the Indian Republic turns 60 years old, the interesting thing is that many of our conventional assumptions about nationhood, politics and economics have actually been challenged. Some have been turned on their head in the last couple of years. A bad year of recession, which has only just begun to wane, has made us question and debate whether globalization and capitalism are good words. A year of terrorism, 26/11 still lives on in the minds and hearts of Indians, has made us question whether we need to change the way we conduct our politics and our security system. As American President Barack Obama gets tagged ever so often with being a new age socialist, there is an unprecedented focus on how the wealthy spend their money and what their contribution is going to be to an increasingly fragile world. And as China emerges very clearly as a power to reckon with, there are even questions over whether a messy democracy is the best way forward. For India especially, it's been a very interesting year. The government that's just come into power, it's widely believed, has ridden on the back of welfare schemes like the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme and farm loan waivers running into 60,000 crores. What does that mean for what we used to consider smart economics? Is there a consensus anymore on what smart economics is? And if there is one, given that the opposite of what was once considered smart economics seems to yield political results, does that mean that good politicians must, by definition, be scared of good economics? That's how we framed our conversation today, and I want to start with NK, of course. NK, very interesting title. Not by reason alone. But the question becomes that in the fragile, ever-changing world we live in, what was once considered reasonable may now be looked upon as unreasonable. For example, nationalization of banks in India were the dark ages. Now you've got Obama doing it, almost. What is reasonable?
Well, I think I agree with you, Barkha, that what is reasonable depends from what kind of a vantage point you're looking at. What kind of a crystal gazing are you doing? Isn't it reasonable that an Indian economy which is growing at barely over 4% is effortlessly growing at now over 7%, is likely to grow at 8–9%? Isn't it very apparent that the policies we began in 1991, yes, in a dialectics where politics and sensible economics pulled in opposite direction, and how to bring about a kind of a convergence between good politics and good economics. And what I have really learned is that if you act from the politics of fear, then you are likely to end up with the politics of folly. Because I do not think that politics is the art of the possible. It is more the art of being able to balance what is reasonable from what is disastrous. And sometimes what is sensible may not be really acceptable.
An example of disaster?
An example of disaster, for instance, would be that if we reverse the hands of the clock, began to renationalize Indian industry, began to raise tax rates, began to raise customs rates, if we did all that, that would be disastrous. It would be going against the current of history. It would be reversing the time clock in which many of us have joined hands to move forward.
Mukesh Ambani, as perhaps India's most prominent industrialist, do you see something quite peculiar having happened in the second tenure of the UPA? It's a government minus the left, that it created the impression that there was going to be a sort of speed-neck pace of economic reforms. Yet we actually see, in a sense, the reverse. We see much more caution. We see a greater reluctance at proceeding with what were once known as reforms. Does that disappoint you, or do you understand it in the light of the recession or the year of recession that we've just come out of?
Well, I think, Barkha, we've got to recognize the fact that what the world has gone through in 2008 is the single most important economic event after the Great Depression. And coming out of that, or in that context, if we look at India,
Tuba.com